Some receivers are surging up and stealing headlines, while others could have a ripple effect once they're back from injury. We account for it all in these Week 5 wide receiver rankings. Justin Jefferson is at the top and is a no-brainer at the rate that he's been producing at, so let's not even overthink this one. He has a 30.7% target share that may not be at the top of the league, but it's top 10, and he averages over 16 yards per reception. He is a down-the-field threat, as I'm sure you all know by now. The Vikings also throw the ball more often than anybody else at almost 70% of the time. He's passed the eye tests all around. The best receiver in the league has a 70.7% catch rate, and he's ranked in all 33 of the catchable balls thrown in his direction so far. Yes, the Kansas City secondary has been tough, but the Chiefs are 4-point favorites over a squad that has already operated with a throw-heavy reputation in the Vikings. If they're working from behind again, look for more and more Jefferson usage. Tyreek Hill is coming off of a rare performance where he didn't manage to put up a double-digit fantasy score. 3 catches on 5 targets for just 58 yards, especially in a game where the Dolphins were working from behind and threw the ball 35 times, is not going to cut it, but that's the Bills' secondary for you. They're tough. Even with the poor showing, Hill is one of just 3 receivers to have over 100 total fantasy points so far this season. The Giants' secondary, his matchup this week, is not nearly as ruthless. They've allowed 40 more passing yards per game than Buffalo has, but the spread is wide for this matchup. You've got to bank on Tyreek Hill getting involved early in case this game gets out of hand and turns into a blowout. That's where Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, and the running game on this team get cooking. Stefon Diggs had one of the most productive days a receiver could have with the cards he was dealt in Week 4. Buffalo was up by multiple possessions for a while, meaning Diggs needed to get involved early, and he did. On just 7 targets, the man brought in 6 receptions for 120 yards and had 3 trips to the end zone, and with that performance, that's now 3 games with at least 100 receiving yards so far for Diggs through just 4 weeks. We're seeing Josh Allen take his deep shots with Gabe Davis, while Stefon Diggs' yards per reception average sticks around the 12s, but he's getting the volume, so who cares? Now the wide receiver 5 in fantasy takes on a Jacksonville defense that has given up an average of 20.2 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. A.J. Brown is coming off of a monstrous performance against the Commanders in Week 4. A lot of people bought low on him after the first couple of weeks, and surely enough, we saw Jalen Hurts begin to target a man who broke the Eagles' receiving yards record last year once more. He's also one of the most dangerous talents in the open field, as Brown is 4th in the NFL with 154 yards after the catch. Brown now leads all Eagles receivers by at least 14 targets. The Rams are stingy, as they've only allowed 184 passing yards per contest, but I will gladly trust somebody with the 2nd highest target share in the entire league at 35.5%. CeeDee Lamb has looked remarkable so far, and the Cowboys have made it no secret that they want him heavily involved once again. He's got a team-high 30 targets so far, but that's honestly a mark that would be way higher if Dallas hadn't been in 3 blowout victories already. Lamb is top 10 in the league in plays for at least 20 yards, so the breakout potential is there, and he has just been consistent so far. Even with games that had 4, 7, and 6 targets, Lamb has managed to put up 11, 10, and 15 points. He's doing more with less. He's facing the 49ers in San Francisco, which is no easy task, but what if I told you that CeeDee Lamb could put up one of his best performances of the year? I wouldn't call it likely that the Cowboys absolutely blow out the 49ers, considering they are 3.5-point underdogs, so at the very least, we get 4 full quarters where CeeDee Lamb has a legitimate chance of getting some volume. Davante Adams has looked phenomenal from a fantasy perspective so far this year. I was a bit worried about the departure of his college buddy in Derek Carr and the usage situation, but under Jimmy Garoppolo and now Aiden O'Connell, Adams is hanging around with a league-high 38.2% target share. He's also tied with Jake Ferguson for the league lead in red zone targets at 10. Jair Alexander would line up against him. He's questionable at the moment, so we'll have to monitor his status throughout the week ahead of Monday night, when considering the possibility that he would shadow his former teammate in Adams. Adams is on a pass-heavy offense in Vegas that throws the ball 63% of the time. That's the 6th highest mark in the league, and I think they'll have to throw it a ton against Green Bay, considering the Packers are road favorites in this one. Ja'Marr Chase is up next after a 2nd straight game where I'd say he kept fantasy owners relatively satisfied. 14 fantasy points isn't anything crazy, but it's better than the 9 and 8-point performances we got from him in weeks 1 and 2. I would still consider Ja'Marr Chase as a buy low candidate, considering that he sits at the wide receiver 21 spot, and Joe Burrow looks like he still isn't at 100%, especially when teams send pressure. That's what Tennessee did last week. This offense isn't going to be operating at the production we're accustomed to from the last couple of years, but with T. Higgins out, I've got to take somebody who, once again, led his team in targets last week at number 7. Arizona's secondary is allowing more than 240 passing yards per game. That's bottom 10 in the league. Keep an eye on Ja'Marr Chase to capitalize this week if Joe Burrow can get him the ball down the field. Puka Nacua is at number 8 with the Cooper Kupp situation considered, and I'll expand on that in just a moment when we get to Kupp's name. Nacua leads the league in receptions and yards, and the 5th rounder out of BYU is honestly putting up quite the argument for Offensive Rookie of the Year. within an offense that has been throwing the ball a lot, 62% of the time to be exact. Nacua joins Justin Jefferson as one of 2 receivers in the league to have cleared 500 receiving yards already through 4 weeks, and he's 3rd in the NFL with 168 yards after the catch. Philadelphia is bottom 8 in terms of giving up fantasy points to receivers, and Puka proved that he can persevere through volume when he had 15 receptions with 30.1 fantasy points against San Francisco's secondary in week 2, and he's honestly kept the pace up. The Rams are home at SoFi in controlled weather conditions. That'll favor a pass-heavy scheme, and working from behind against a team that's favored by 4.5 points would also warrant a pass-heavy scheme. There's plenty of room to operate within this team, even if Kupp is in this week, since they run a league-high 71 plays per game. Chris Olave ended up having a date with Antoine Winfield in the Bucs secondary last week, and it did not go well, folks. While 1 reception for 4 yards is alarming, I would say Olave was targeted more than most would be with a performance like that. 6 targets certainly isn't bad, all things considered. We also have to consider the anomaly of Alvin Kamara getting 13 receptions, which he took for 33 yards, by the way. Very weird stat line. Whether it's Jameis Winston or Derek Carr this week, we will have to monitor that. I would expect the wide receiver 1 on New Orleans' roster and this whole offense really to have a bounce-back week against the Patriots after a game that was riddled with checkdowns. Amon-Ra St. Brown is Mr. Consistent so far this year. He kicked off the year by scoring the first touchdown of the 2023 season, and Jared Goff has continued to make him the first option ever since. St. Brown leads the team with an average of just below 9 targets per contest. He has 4 of the 8 red zone targets among the Lions' wide receiving room, but we do need to watch the availability here. St. Brown was battling a foot injury a couple of weeks ago, and now at the time of this recording, he was listed as a non-participant in practice through at least Wednesday with an abdomen problem. There's also the fact that he has a pretty tough matchup against the Panthers this upcoming week. Not only does a 9.5-point spread indicate that the Lions could win this easily and toss the pass game out of the window by the second half, but the Panthers are allowing the 5th least amount of fantasy points to receivers. If St. Brown is on a snap count, drop him at least a tier and ask me any questions you have from there. I have Devonta Smith at number 11 here, despite falling back to the secondary option in Philly's passing attack. Now, being the second option in a passing attack for a team that only throws the ball 50% of the time should be a problem, but Devonta Smith is still getting a high amount of targets at the expense of the rest of this receiving core. While Brown and Smith have combined for 72 targets through 4 weeks, the remainder of this Eagles team has combined for just 49 targets. So we're seeing Dallas Goedert averaging less than 5 targets per game, an average he has hit in every season outside of his rookie year in 2018. So Devonta Smith still getting targeted a very healthy amount, all things considered, in this offense. Smith is cruising with over 15 fantasy points per contest so far, and I like someone who has logged over 7 targets per game as well. I've got Jalen Waddle here in this matchup against the Giants this week. Waddle has never really relied on volume. It has always been more of a matter of quality over quantity for this down-the-field target, considering he does share the receiving room with Tyreek Hill. That's indicative when you look at the fact that 6 of Waddle's 12 receptions so far have gone for at least 20 yards. He's down the field for sure. I'd say he's a pretty decent buy low candidate at this point as well, considering that Jalen Waddle is yet to get in the end zone and only has 1 red zone target through 4 weeks. This team just played a stifling Bills secondary. Now they've got a more doable matchup against the Giants team struggling on all fronts. Not too long ago, I said that Garrett Wilson's value is in peril until one of 2 things happens. Zach Wilson gets better or the Jets sign a new quarterback. Well, if you tuned into the TV on Monday night, you know exactly what happened. Now Garrett Wilson is facing off against one of the worst defenses in the league, that's Denver, allowing 37.5 points per game through 4 weeks, and they also just kind of let the Bears almost win a game. Not to mention this Jets offense is coming off of one of the best starts of Zach Wilson's career. Buckle up, this could be a good one. Brandon Ayuk saw the majority of production in the passing game last week despite having only 6 targets. We saw something similar to week 1 where Ayuk caught every target. This time it was 6 receptions on 6 targets for 148 yards. When Brandon Ayuk is healthy, he's dangerous, he's got top 10 potential. It is not going to be an easy task for him against a Dallas secondary this week that is allowing just 148 passing yards per contest, but a lot of that success has come from pressuring the QB and forcing quick throws out. San Francisco has one of the best offensive lines in the entire league. Really looking forward to this matchup, honestly, as a football fan. So I don't see that part being an issue in terms of the pressure on Brock Purdy, with Ayuk putting together a pair of phenomenal performances when he has been healthy in weeks 1 and 4. I think he still has a productive day at the office in a heavyweight matchup against Dallas. Ranking Cooper Kupp is a tough call considering we don't even know if he's going to be playing. Here's what we do know. He is back in practice this week. After 4 weeks of being on the IR, Coop enters a 21-day period where he'll look to get back to a level where Los Angeles feels comfortable with activating him. Here's what we also know. Even if Cooper Kupp is not at 100%, if he's in for around half the snaps or a bit over that, he's still dangerous and has fantasy potential. Cooper Kupp is still a threat to creep into the top 15, considering that in 2021, he commanded the best target share percentage in the entire league by 2 percentage points at 31.7. Matthew Stafford gained a liking towards somebody who nearly hit 2,000 receiving yards in a season that year. If we get a fraction of that production, if Kupp is even back, he's an immediate plug-in for some teams. A healthy DeAndre Hopkins can still be a top 20 wide receiver in this league. We saw the potential upside with 13 targets in week 1, but since then, he has seen just 18 targets over the course of the last 3 weeks combined. All things considered, DeAndre Hopkins is hovering around 10 fantasy points per game. This offense has always been classified as a run-heavy one, we know that, but Derrick Henry has definitely regressed, even though he had a phenomenal week 4. The soon-to-be 30-year-old is averaging 3.9 yards per carry, making me think the Titans opt to utilize the passing game a little bit more. Now, DeAndre Hopkins is 31, not denying age on his front either, but this team went out and got a couple of quarterbacks in the top 3 rounds in each of the last 2 years, and then got Hopkins, so it looks like they're trying to make a greater commitment to the pass. Treylon Burks, the wide receiver 2 in Tennessee, is questionable at the time of this recording, meaning Hopkins could have another prime shot to go off against the Colts secondary, giving up plenty of opportunity. They're allowing the 5th most amount of passing yards per game at 264. Nico Collins has been tearing it up, and it looks like the third-year receiver is the tentative primary option for CJ Stroud. I'm still figuring out that Texas offense with the rest of you. Collins leads the entire league in yards after catch, averaging an insane 19.5 yards per reception, yet he's still consistent enough to be the wide receiver 7 in standard PPR. Houston is throwing the ball 59% of the time, around the middle of the pack in terms of pass frequency, but they may need to throw it more against a tough Atlanta team that's favored by a pair of points at home this week. AJ Terrell in the Falcons secondary is healthy, productive, and only allowing 176 passing yards per game. I would be willing to bet that somebody averaging 107 receiving yards per game in Collins gets a decent amount of looks, but Houston's offense is really going to get tested here in week 5. We'll have to see. Lots of volume, opportunity, down the field action meets tough secondary. Should be a fun matchup. I have Deebo Samuel here after he definitely wasn't 100% healthy in week 4. He was likely just in to give Arizona another part of this offense to prepare for, and I would say it worked judging by the results. Now Deebo was hurt again with a rib injury and a knee injury that limited him during Wednesday's practice. If he remains limited through the rest of the week, you know the rules. Drop him at least a tier and ask me any questions beyond that. Samuel at 100% is a worthwhile play here if we get that. He didn't get a ton of touches when Dallas and San Francisco faced off in the playoffs last year, but he was a semi-effective option when he had the ball in his hands. Samuel racked in 4 receptions for 45 yards and had 4 rushes for 11 yards. There's already enough volume competition as it is on this team with Ayuk, Kittle, and the beast that is Christian McCaffrey on the ground and through the air, but let's monitor Samuel's health in what will likely be an all-hands-on-deck game for both Dallas and San Fran. I highly doubt the 49ers keep Samuel out if they don't have to for a matchup like this. Michael Pittman is at number 19 on my list for this week with an interesting season going so far. We talked about him weathering the storm of having various quarterbacks throw him the ball so far in his career, and this year it has been Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew so far. Pittman is currently the wide receiver 19 in standard PPR formats, but he had a tough week 4 against the Rams with just 1 catch on 5 targets. He faces Tennessee this week. The Titans secondary has shown plenty of holes early on, allowing the 10th most amount of passing yards per game at 243. That value did drop last week. And the reason they had a lot of success last week was due to the fact that they bull rushed an injured Joe Burrow. With Pittman Jr. having just 9.4 yards per carry, if Richardson were to get bull rushed, this guy might be the get-out-of-jail-free card who gets shorter routes or at least just gets his head around early enough in Pittman. The 28.7% target share so far indicates that he's the most trustworthy pass catcher on the team at the very least. Christian Kirk has seen the most volume in a receiving room in Jacksonville that is flooded with talent so far. The race was on between he and Calvin Ridley going into the week, but then Kirk had 12 targets to Ridley's 2. With Jacksonville staying in London this week following a victory over the struggling Falcons, they've got a tough matchup against the Buffalo Bills. Trevor Lawrence has struggled to effectively throw the ball down the field so far this year, so he's averaging just 6.6 yards per attempt. Kirk does only have 1 red zone target, but the volume arrow has been pointing in his direction, and he's the more conservative option. Look, Trevor Lawrence hasn't thrown the ball down the field with too much efficiency yet. He's been relying on these underneath routes, and Kirk has been running those routes. Calvin Ridley himself is right behind Christian Kirk here, so let's stay on this situation. Ridley is now listed as the wide receiver 1 on the Jags depth chart, but he's actually the 3rd most targeted pass catcher behind not just Christian Kirk, but Evan Ingram as well. Out of the 28 targets that Ridley has seen, only 18 have been catchable. For reference, the league average for catchable ball rate was around 79% last year. 18 out of 28 for Ridley so far is 64%, so well below the mark. This could be from the fact that Ridley is new to this team or that these passes he's seeing are just further down the field. He is averaging 21.2 air yards per reception. Same thing as Kirk. It's a tough matchup against the Bills, but the Jags have an electric offense if they're firing on all cylinders. Terry McLaurin makes this list because while he's in an offense I'm not too excited about, The matchup is too tempting. The Chicago Bears proved to all of us last week that they are the worst team in the NFL, and they couldn't have done it without their defense, blowing a 21-point lead with just a little bit over a quarter to go. McLaurin has racked in over 80% of his targets and will be facing a Chicago defense allowing 268 passing yards per contest, among the bottom ranks in the league. Scary Terry does have volume competition, as Jahan Dotson has just one less target than him, while Curtis Samuel has 20 of his own targets. So I'd say that limits the ceiling of McLaurin, but Chicago is playing so poorly, and both Jalen Johnson, so the cornerback one, and Eddie Jackson, the lead safety, are listed as out ahead of Thursday night's contest. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for this Commanders offense to drive the ball down the field. Adam Thielen once again saw a healthy amount of usage in week 4, with 7 catches on 8 targets for 78 yards. That's now the 3rd week in a row that Thielen has seen at least 8 targets after having just 2 targets in the opening week. Thielen now has a team-best 33 looks for a unit that is likely going to have to throw the ball a lot this year, as they are tied with the Bears for the worst record in the NFL, so they work from behind a lot. I'd expect that throw-heavy trend to keep up this week to benefit Thielen, even if Terrace Marshall Jr., who was the lead target getter last week, continues to get more usage. Detroit is middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points given up to receivers, but the Lions are 10-point favorites, so a pass-heavy scheme should be in line again. But the Lions are 10-point favorites, so a pass-heavy scheme in Carolina should be in line again. DJ Moore is in at number 24. I'm not a huge fan of searching for components of a poor offense, but since week 1, Moore has been one of the few bright spots for the Bears. He's the wide receiver 14 in a standard PPR format, despite only being targeted 24 times, and the man now has a touchdown in each of his last 2 games. We don't want touchdown reliance, that's for sure, but the matchup against the Commanders is too enticing to pass up as well. They allowed the 7th most amount of fantasy points to receivers so far, and if this game goes like all the others have, Chicago will be working from behind at some point and will need to lean on their number 1 guy. Marquise Brown rounds out our top 25, and he's got a decent matchup against a Bengals squad that is a 3-point underdog at home. The Bengals are middle of the pack against receivers for fantasy points allowed, and the wide receiver 17 in standard PPR, and Brown, is coming off of his 2nd game over the course of the last 3 weeks with 10 targets. That's 3 weeks in a row with at least 15 fantasy points, and with Rondale Moore being used in more of a utility-like role, think Deebo Samuel, the opportunity is there for the taking for Marquise Brown. Fringe players that just missed this list but are still inside of my top 30-ish are Christian Watson, Michael Thomas, George Pickens, Tank Dell, Jordan Addison, and Romeo Doubs. Thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Feel free to ask me any questions you may have in the comment section below. Like and subscribe if we're helping you out in fantasy football as we roll into week 5, and we will see you in the next video.